So it is the end of chapter 20, Trumpet of the Swan, Billings chapter, and we'll see if we can get through chapter 21. Let's see. At the hospital, the old cob lay peacefully in bed, thinking beautiful thoughts. He felt thankful to be alive and relieved to be out of debt. It was getting dark, and many of the patients in the hospital were asleep already. A nurse came to the cob's room to open his window. When she came back a few minutes later to take the cob's temperature and give him a back rub, the bed was empty. The room was deserted. The cob had jumped out of the window, spread his broad wings, and headed for home through the cold night sky. He flew all night, crossed the mountains, and arrived home soon after daylight, where his wife was waiting for him. "How did it go?" she asked. "Oh, very well," he said. "An extraordinary adventure. I was shot at, just as you predicted. The storekeeper pointed a gun at me and fired. I felt agonizing pain in my left shoulder, which I've always considered the more beautiful of my two shoulders. Blood gushed from my wound in torrents, and I sank gracefully to the sidewalk, where I handed over the money and thus regained my honor and my decency. I was at death's door. A great multitude of people gathered. Blood was everywhere. I became faint and passed out with the dignity in front of all. The police arrived, dozens of them. We know there were really just 2. Game wardens flocked to the scene in great numbers, and there was a tremendous argument about the money." "How did you know all of this if you were unconscious?" asked his wife. "My dear," said the cob, "I wish you wouldn't interrupt me when I'm telling the story of my trip. Seeing my grave condition, someone in the crowd summoned an ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital where I was put to bed. I looked very beautiful lying there, my black bill contrasting with the snowy white sheets. Doctors and nurses attended me and comforted me in my hour of suffering and pain. You can judge how serious my wound was when I tell you that one of the doctors examined it and said it was superficial." "Well, it doesn't look that bad to me," said his wife. "I think you just got nicked." "If it had been bad, you couldn't have flown back so soon. Anyway, superficial or not, I'm glad to see you're home safe. I always miss you when you're gone. I don't know why, but I always do." And with that, she placed her head across his neck and gave him a slight nudge. Then they had breakfast and went for a swim in the open place in the frozen lake. The cob pulled his band-aid off and threw it away. Chapter 21. The Greening Spring. Louis and Serena were more in love than ever. When spring came, they flew north, Louis wearing his trumpet and his slate and his chalk pencil and his medal, Serena wearing nothing at all. Now that he no longer had to work and earn, Louis felt a great sense of relief. No more would he have to carry a money bag around his neck. The 2 swans flew high and fast, 10,000 feet above the earth. They arrived at last at the little pond in the wilderness where Louis had been hatched. This was his dream, to return with his love to the place in Canada where he had first seen the light of day. He escorted Serena from one end of the pond to the other and back again. He showed her the tiny island where his mother's nest had been. He showed her the log that Sam Beaver had been sitting on when Louis had pulled his shoelace because he couldn't say beep. Serena was enchanted. They were in love. It was spring. The frog was waking from his long sleep. The turtle was coming to life again after his nap. The chipmunk felt the warm air, soft and kind, blow through the trees, just as it did that springtime when Louis's father and mother had visited the pond to nest and raise their young. The sun shone down strong and steady. Ice was melting. Patches of open water appeared on the pond. Louis and Serena felt the changing world, and they stirred with new life, rapture, and hope. There was a smell in the air, a smell of earth waking after its long winter. The trees were putting out tiny green buds, and the buds were swelling. That's happening right now. A better, easier time was at hand. A pair of mallard ducks flew in. A sparrow with a white throat arrived and sang, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." Serena chose a muskrat lodge on which to build her nest. It was the right height above the water. The muskrats had built it of mud and sticks. Louis had hoped his wife might decide whether to make her nest in the same spot where his mother had built hers. But females are full of notions. They want their own way, pretty much, and Serena knew what she was doing. Louis was so delighted when he saw her begin to construct the nest. He really didn't care where it was. He raised his horn to his mouth and played the beginning of an old song. "It's delightful to be married, to be married." Then he helped by bringing a few pieces of coarse grass. Rain or shine, cold or warm, every day was a happy day for those two swans. In time, the eggs were laid and the cygnets were hatched, 4 of them. The first sound the baby swans heard was the pure, strong sound of their father's trumpet. Oh, ever in the greening spring he played, by the bank and bough retiring. Life was gay and busy and sweet in a little lonely pond in the north woods. Once in a while Sam Beaver would show up for a visit, and they would have great times together. Lewis never forgot his old jobs, his old friends, or his promise to the head man in charge of birds in Philadelphia. As the years went by, he and Serena returned each spring to the pond, nested and had their young, and each year at the end of summer, when the molt was over and the flight feathers grew back and the cygnets were ready to try their wings, Lewis took his family for a long pleasure trip across America. He led them first to Camp Coocoos, where he had saved the life of Applegate Skinner and won his medal, remember that? The camp would be closed for the season, but Lewis liked to revisit it and wander around, remembering the boys and how he earned his first $100 as a camp bugler. Then the swans would fly to Boston, where the swan boat man always gave them a big welcome. Lewis would polish up his horn, blow the spit out of it, and swim in front of the boats again, playing Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And the people of Boston would hear the familiar sound of the trumpet of the swan and would flock to the public garden. Then the boatman would treat Lewis and Serena to a night at the Ritz Hotel, while the cygnets spent the night by themselves on the lake, watched over by the boatman. Serena dearly loved the Ritz. She ate dozens of watercress sandwiches and gazed at herself in the mirror and swam in the bathtub. And while Lewis stood and looked out the window at the public garden down below, Serena would walk around and around, turning lights on and off, just for the fun of it. Then they'd both get into the bathtub and go to sleep. From Boston, Lewis would lead his family to the Philadelphia Zoo and show them Bird Lake. Here he would be greeted warmly by the head man in charge of birds. If the zoo needed a young trumpeter swan to add to its collection of waterfowl, Lewis would donate one of his cygnets, just as he had promised. In later years, Philadelphia was also the place where they would see Sam Beaver. Sam took a job with the zoo just as soon as he was old enough to go to work. He and Lewis always had a great time when they got together. Lewis would get out his slate and they'd have long talks about the old times. After visiting Philadelphia, Lewis would fly south with his wife and children so they could see the great savannas, where alligators dozed in the swamp water and turkey buzzards soared in the sky, and then they would return home to spend the winter in Red Rock Lakes of Montana, in the lovely, serene Centennial Valley where all the trumpeter swans felt safe and unafraid. The life of a swan must be a very pleasant, interesting life, and of course Lewis's life was particularly pleasant because he was a musician. Lewis took good care of his trumpet. He kept it clean and spent hours polishing it with tips of his wing feathers. As long as he lived, he felt grateful to his father, the brave cob who had risked his life in order to give him the trumpet he needed so badly. Every time Lewis looked at Serena, he remembered the sound of the trumpet was what made her willing to come be his mate. Swans often live to be very old. Year after year, Lewis and Serena returned in the spring to the same small pond in Canada to raise their family. The days were peaceful. Always, just at the edge of dark, when the young cygnets were getting sleepy, Lewis, I'll show you that picture in a minute, would raise his horn and play taps, just as he used to do at camp long ago. So that does look like a peaceful place to be living. I think they're pretty happy there. The notes were sad and beautiful as they floated across the still water and up into the night sky. One summer, when Sam Beaver was about 20, he and his father were sitting in their camp in Canada. It was after supper. Mr. Beaver was rocking in his chair, resting after a day of fishing, and Sam was reading a book. "Pop," said Sam, "what does serpiscular mean?" "Well, how should I know?" replied Mr. Beaver. "I never heard the word before." "Well, it has something to do with rabbits," said Sam. "It says here that a rabbit is a serpiscular animal." "Probably means timid," said Mr. Beaver. "Or maybe it means it can run like the dickens. Or maybe it means stupid. A rabbit will sit right in the middle of the road at night and stare at your headlights and never get out of the way. That's how a lot of rabbits get run over. They're stupid." "Well," said Sam, "I guess the only way to find out what serpiscular means is to look it up in the dictionary." "Well, we haven't got a dictionary here," said Mr. Beaver. "You'll have to wait till we get back to the ranch." Just then, over the pond where the swans were, Lewis raised his horn and played taps to let his children know the day had come to an end. The wind was right, and the sound carried across the swamp. Mr. Beaver stopped rocking. "That's funny," he said. "I thought I heard the sound of a trumpet just then." I don't know how you could," replied Sam. "We're all alone in these woods." "I know we are," said Mr. Beaver. "Just the same, I thought I heard a trumpet, or a bugle." Sam chuckled. He never told his father about the swans in the pond nearby. He kept their secret to himself. When he went to the pond, he always went alone. That's the way he liked it. And that's the way the swans liked it. "Whatever happened to your friend Lewis?" asked Mr. Beaver. "Lewis was a trumpeter. You don't suppose he's somewhere around here, do you?" "He might be," said Sam. "Have you heard from him recently?" asked Mr. Beaver. "No," replied Sam. "He doesn't write any more. He ran out of postage stamps. He also has no money to buy stamps with." "Oh," said Mr. Beaver. "Well, the whole business about that bird was very queer. I never did fully understand it." Sam looked across at his father and saw that his eyes had closed. Mr. Beaver was falling asleep. There was hardly any sound to disturb the stillness of the woods. Sam was tired and sleepy, too. He got out his notebook and sat down at the table by the light of the kerosene lamp, and this is what he wrote. "Tonight I heard Lewis's horn. My father heard it, too. The wind was right, and I could hear the notes of taps just as darkness fell. There's nothing in the world I like better than the trumpet of the swan. What does Serpiscular mean?" Sam put his notebook away. He undressed and slid into bed. He lay there, wondering what that word meant. In less than 3 minutes, he was fast asleep. On the pond where the swans were, Lewis put his trumpet away. The cygnets crept under their mother's wings. Darkness settled on the woods and fields and marsh. A loon called its wild night cry. As Lewis relaxed and prepared for sleep, all his thoughts were of how lucky he was to inhabit such a beautiful earth. How lucky he had been to solve his problems with music, and how pleasant it was to look forward to another night of sleep and another day tomorrow, and a fresh morning, and the light that returns with day. The end. And that is the whole story of the Trumpet of the Swan. I hope you liked it.